The United States is known to have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Parents that reside in poorer urban areas may find themselves in jail for robbery, assault, or drug possession. Families in mainly white upper-class neighborhoods may see a parent going to jail for alcohol abuse or fraud. According to a special report by the Justice Department's Bureau of Statistics, between 1991 and 2007, parents held at state and federal prisons increased by 79%. Children of incarcerated parents increased by 80%. Shaquille Mualimm-ak recently graduated from high school, but he was only 10 years old when his father was incarcerated.
Well, my dad was incarcerated when I was 10, going on 11 years old. I found out it was funny how I found out. It was after school, you know. I just had seen him on the weekends, and it was a weekday. I just got off of school, and I came home to my mom, and she told me, well, she didn't really tell me immediately. Like, she was just acting really weird, and she eventually told me that my dad was locked up, and I couldn't really wrap my mind around it because I had just seen him on the weekend, and I was used to that. I was expecting to see him on the coming up weekend, so it was really hard to take in.
Shaquille's father spent 12 years in prison, and while incarcerated in New York State Prison, he spent 5 of those 12 years in solitary confinement for non-violent disciplinary infractions. Shaquille grew up with little contact with his father, since individuals in disciplinary segregation in New York are most often denied visits and phone calls.
It was like a part of me was missing. It was like a person that I was used to always being around was just gone, just taken away from me. It felt like somebody died. It wasn't a good feeling at all.
Shaquille says the confinement of his father felt like he too was incarcerated, doing time along with him. And communication with him was difficult because of the circumstances he was under. As a growing teen, problems such as puberty, hormonal rage, and many other things teenage boys typically go through were uncomfortable to talk to his mother about. He didn't know how to bring those conversations up to her, and she didn't know how to respond or what to say the seldom times he attempted it. He felt angry.
For the most part, I feel like at first I went through a angry phase where I was really just angry at the world. I got into a lot of trouble in school. I had a lot of behavioral issues, stuff like that. Also, I would read a lot. Like, I would read tons of books just to like escape the world and reality around me. And that's, I play chess and stuff like that, things to keep my mind away from even thinking about, my dad and stuff. I just really, I educated myself basically on the system instead of just going off of my feelings and how I was feeling.
Shaquille's father is now a well-known prison reform activist. Mualimm-ak is also director of the organization Incarcerated Nation Campaign. His activism has reached schools and universities nationwide. Today, Shaquille works side by side his father at the Incarcerated Nation Campaign. He is the director of youth services, where he aims to educate his peers and give a voice to youth at risk of incarceration.
I help to teach and educate youth on the system and how there are pitfalls and how there are traps to get us into the system and keep us trapped into the system. I mean, one, for minority youth, we already, our communities are polluted with liquor stores and drugs and all types of things to get us into trouble and to keep us in the system. So it's about, what I do is I try to open awareness to youth about, the pitfalls and traps that are set up for us.
In 2011, there were more than 120,000 incarcerated mothers and 1.1 million fathers. Currently, there are more than 2.7 million children in the U.S. that have at least one incarcerated parent, and approximately 10 million children have experienced parental incarceration at some point in their lives. Demographically, that's 1 in 9 African American children, 1 in 28 Hispanic children, and 1 in 57 white children with an incarcerated parent in the United States. One of the most controversial debates surrounding this matter is whether having an incarcerated parent means the child will eventually go to prison too someday. Some believe that there still isn't adequate research to prove whether a child is more likely to go to jail. But according to the Department of Health and Human Services, children of incarcerated parents are 7 times more likely to be locked up one day.
A lot, we face being misled by others, we want to fit in, we want like some type of sense of want or need, from other people, and we might get mixed in with the wrong crowds or groups or gangs or whatever. I never personally did, but speaking for other people, that's what happens, we want to fit in, we want some attention, we want somebody to hear our voice, and we do stupid stuff, but we shouldn't, and we should think with our heads.
Some of the emotional issues children often face is chronic sleeplessness, difficulties concentrating, and depression. 16% of children develop temporary school phobias that make them unwilling to attend school for up to 6 weeks following their parents' incarceration. Others may react with anger, defiance, and a desire for retaliation towards those who reject and taunt them. I asked Shaquille what his advice would be to others who deal with the issue he's dealt with.
Study, study, study. Study mostly on your history and just how, once you read on history, you recognize how it repeats itself. It never really changes, nothing ever really changes, it just repeats itself in different forms. And incarceration is just another form of slavery. If you know history, you know that.
Alan Singer is a professor of teaching, literacy, and leadership at Hofstra University and the program director of graduate programs in social studies education. Dr. Singer is a former New York City high school social studies teacher and is editor of Social Science Docket. The incarceration of parents in the United States is a form of dual punishment, he tells me. Adults are punished, but so are innocent children.
The arrest and incarceration of a parent is very much a dual punishment. The incarcerated parent is punished, but we are also looking at the punishment of children. And there doesn't seem to be very much focus on what is happening to children who are left behind. I think the incarceration of the parents creates a crisis. It takes a crisis for the child. It creates a crisis for families. It creates a crisis for communities, but it also creates a crisis for American society as a whole.
When a parent goes to jail, typically the remaining parent is left to care for the children, unless in certain cases the children could be put up for adoption. 88% of incarcerated fathers rely on the mother to provide daily care, and 2% rely on foster care. 37% of incarcerated mothers rely on the father to provide care. 45% rely on the grandparents' care. 23% rely on friends or relatives, and 11% rely on foster care.
Children who are left behind don't form emotional bonds with parents. They need those emotional bonds to mature into adults who care about others, but those bonds are broken. No one is looking at that. No one seems to be concerned about that. You have communities which have large concentrations, particularly inner city, poor minority communities, large concentrations of children who are living under these circumstances. And they go to schools, puts tremendous stress on schools. It puts tremendous stress on the caregivers who remain home with them. Lots of times their grandparents have to take on responsibility for these children. The children end up feeling responsible for the breakup of their families. They don't know what happened to their parent. They don't understand why. So we're looking at tremendous emotional stress on these children, economic stress on the caregivers who remain, and so we're looking at crises in communities.
Singer and I also talk about the logistical hardships for families when it comes to visitation, especially in the winter cold. He recently visited Greenhaven Prison.
When people are incarcerated, the people on the outside have no support. The caregivers have no support. The mothers, the fathers have no support. And that then reverberates down on the children. What we have is a system in the United States of dual punishment, but these children have committed no crimes.
But also for those children that do visit, the process can have many complicated factors, varying from the distance to the correctional facility, the cost of transportation, the number of visitors, and setting an appointment to visit. Some facilities also have limited and confusing visitation schedules that change each month depending on the inmate's last name. Men's correctional facilities are more common, although women's facilities are not. And on average, a child travels 160 miles to visit their incarcerated mother.
A lot of these women are women who became involved in drug-related activities, often just as users. People end up dealing to support their own drug habits. These kind of activities are non-racial. These kind of activities are the activities that poor people become involved in. And I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the impact of poverty on people's lives. And it's very important to note that this is not a racial phenomenon. I mean, one of the problems is looking at having a parent in jail means you're going to grow up in poverty. Having a parent in jail, you're going to grow up disconnected. Those are the conditions that lead to later incarceration. One of the big problems that faces parents who have been incarcerated is even after they get out. The United States has a recidivism rate of about 50%. And the reason for that is there's no work. People get out of jail, they try to take responsibility for their families, they try to take responsibility for their children, they can't get jobs, they end up back in criminal activity, and they end up back in jail. We end up with essentially communities of orphans who are divorced from the human ties that they need to develop. And this is not a plan. I don't see a plan anywhere in the United States to care for these children. I work with teachers. These children end up in schools. You have schools with large concentrations of troubled kids. They get teased, they become truant, they become dropout. It's like a self-replicating system where we take parents away, we incarcerate them, the children grow up under these circumstances, and they become the next round of people who are incarcerated.
New data shows that only a very small subset of children, those with abusive parents, were found to be more likely to thrive academically and socially if their parents are incarcerated. In certain situations, it is safer for a child to not be reunited with their incarcerated parent once released. 1 out of 8 children who are reported victims of mistreatment have parents who were recently arrested. In 90% of the cases, it was the child's mother who was arrested. Children are also sometimes concerned about bonding with their parents again if they don't see them reliable. State governments, especially states with Republican governors, have been sharply cutting back on social service budgets since the 2008 financial crisis. The children of incarcerated parents are among the most vulnerable and least protected groups, but services for these children are amongst the easiest to cut. Even states that provide some services usually hire outside organizations.
So what you have is social service budgets are cut, and the most vulnerable in society are the most affected because they don't have the political power to make any change. So what we have are the programs that could reach out to these children disappear. Now, some states do finance support services through nonprofit organizations. But even here, there's very little monitoring. We don't know how successful they are, and they are all desperately underfunded.
There is one group that Singer says is doing a sufficient job in taking positive measures in tackling the issue. The San Francisco Children of Incarcerated Parents Partnership developed an 8-point Bill of Rights for children of incarcerated parents.
It includes the right to be heard when decisions are made about them, to be considered when decisions are made about their parents, to be cared for in a parent's absence, to speak with, see, and have physical contact with a parent, to be supported as they struggle with a parent's incarceration, not to be judged, not to be blamed, not to be labeled because of a parent's incarceration, and to have the ability to choose, if they choose, to have a lifelong relationship with that parent. No state guarantees that in the United States. I think these are, if we for real want to make sure that these young people have possibility in their lives, that has to be done.
U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder is seeking out criminal justice reform. His goals are to cut imprisonment rates and spending while protecting the public. He has asked the Justice Department to charge nonviolent drug offenders with less severe federal crimes, beyond reducing the use of mandatory minimum sentences and shortening prison time for lower-level drug felons, while reserving more serious charges and longer sentences for violent and higher-up drug offenders. He believes any reform will do more for, quote, the lives being harmed, not helped, by a criminal justice system that doesn't serve the American people as well as it should. There's certainly one group that could benefit from these reforms, and that's the millions of U.S. children today with a parent in jail.